All right. Well, good evening. It's not morning this time. It is still Monday, so you should get this on Tuesday. This will be the last of the respiratory system. Then I give you a test. Woohoo! You know, there are some advantages on doing these lectures on tape. Not a lot. They're kind of crappy. But no one knows what's in my cup, so that's kind of an advantage. Oh. All righty. So all I'm going to do right now is blood transport of carbon dioxide. That's the last thing we got to do, and we'll more or less wrap it up. I may put a PowerPoint up with a little bit of a video with it on high pressure physiology, kind of for fun. It's not in the textbook. I usually cover it in lecture, but it's basically diving. High pressure phys is usually underwater. Some of the problems associated with the respiratory system under high pressure. If I get a chance, I might put one of those up, but this will be about it for the main part. All right, blood transport of carbon dioxide, CO2. All right, a couple things to note. CO2, because of its much higher solubility than oxygen, as the CO2 diffuses from the tissues into the blood, because of its higher solubility, you do carry a significant amount of carbon dioxide in physical solution, or dissolved CO2. About 7% of the carbon dioxide physical solution, I'll abbreviate. About 7% of the carbon dioxide you transport from your tissues to your lungs is just dissolved CO2, or CO2 in physical solution in the plasma. Again, pretty high solubility. So that's 7%. Number two, about 23% is bound to hemoglobin. When CO2 binds to hemoglobin, they call it carbaminohemoglobin. But a couple things to note. Hemoglobin does not bind to the iron atom of the heme group in hemoglobin. It binds to the protein. Different binding site. It doesn't compete with oxygen for a binding site. Just a completely different binding site. And I need to mention that because there is another gas. I'll write it up here. CO. That is carbon monoxide. Don't confuse them. Both of those gases are toxic. Carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide will both kill you. However, most of the time you don't hear too many people dying from carbon dioxide poisoning. For example, if someone, I don't know, snuck in your room with a carbon dioxide tank and turned it on, and the CO2 filled up your room, it wouldn't generally kill you because you'd wake up. High CO2 levels, it's like when you hold your breath for 2 minutes. It's not comfortable. You get anxious. You'd run around. You'd open the window. You'd run out of the room. CO2 is not a sneaky gas. Well, it's true. It's toxic. You know, if someone tied you in place and just fed you CO2, if you breathed in pure CO2, it would kill you. It's a toxic gas, mainly because of its effect on your pH. But you're going to leave the area. It's not sneaky. It won't kill you in your sleep. Carbon monoxide, CO, is the one you hear about, killing people. Usually in the winter when they bring their, charcoal grill or something into the house to heat it up, or lock themselves in the garage with the car running. Carbon monoxide is produced, it's an end product of incomplete combustion. If something burns without enough oxygen present, fuel, coal, oil, gas, what have you, you will start producing carbon monoxide. The reason that one is much more dangerous is it's sneaky. Carbon monoxide does bind to the same spot as oxygen. It binds to the iron atom. However, hemoglobin has a much higher affinity or attraction for carbon monoxide than oxygen. So if you're breathing in a little carbon monoxide, it'll start binding to your hemoglobin and fill it all up. So that hemoglobin, once it has carbon monoxide bound to it, it cannot carry any oxygen. The partial pressure VO2 in your blood would still be normal, but the content would drop way down. Can't get enough oxygen to the tissues. It'll kill you. So that one's, it's dangerous. That's why most modern heating devices, they have oxygen sensors on them. That's not because of, it depletes the oxygen in the room, you're going to suffocate because of lack of oxygen. It's because if you deplete the oxygen in the room where the device is burning, and it keeps burning, it would start cranking out carbon monoxide, kill everyone in the house, so they'll automatically shut off. One of the safety features they have on most modern heating equipment. So that will competitively block oxygen. And the treatment of carbon monoxide poisoning, if it's mild, they just give you fresh air, pure oxygen. In severe cases, they have to give you hyperbaric treatment. They'll put you in a chamber with high pressure oxygen, so your PO2 of oxygen is really high. At really high PO2s, one, you get more oxygen in physical solution. That'll help you. It'll also eventually, at high enough PO2s, the oxygen can actually start knocking off some of the carbon monoxide and get back on the hemoglobin. So for CO2 transport, 7% physical solution, 23% bound to the protein component of hemoglobin. That's not the bulk of it though. Where's the rest of it? Number 3, we've got about 70% left, is transported as HCO3, superscript minus. HCO3 is bicarbonate. Most of the carbon dioxide that's transported from your tissues to the lungs is transported in the form of bicarbonate ions. Where does that come from? Well, you remember this equation, I think I gave it to you a while back. If you take CO2 and you add it to water, CO2 plus H2O, water is in excess, they will combine and you'll produce H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. It's a weak acid. Some of it will dissociate and produce hydrogen ions and HCO3 minus. There's your bicarb. All right. Now this reaction, it will occur spontaneously. You put carbon dioxide in with water. It's how they carbonate beverages. Some of the CO2 will form carbonic acid, which will dissociate. That's why all carbonated beverages are a little bit acidic. Produce hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. But it's fairly slow. Not fast enough to account for this 70%. What happens in the red blood cells, let me draw a red blood cell. There we go, looks like a little donut that didn't make it. It's supposed to be a red blood cell. 2 important proteins in a red blood cell. One, hemoglobin, we've already talked about it. The other one is carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic anhydrase is a very powerful enzyme. It speeds up this reaction about 1 million times. So once the CO2 diffuses into the red blood cell, it comes in contact with this carbonic anhydrase, and very rapidly, carbon dioxide is converted to bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions. Now, those bicarbonate ions will then diffuse out of the red blood cell. They're usually exchanged for chloride ions, so the charge doesn't get all out of whack. They call that the chloride shift. The hydrogen ions, though, there's a boatload of hydrogen ions produced. Your blood should get like acidic like battery acid after it passes through the tissues. You're producing a boatload of hydrogen ions. Your blood pH doesn't shift that much. How come? If you remember last semester, you might have talked about blood buffers a bit. There's a lot of pH buffers in your blood. Bicarbonate is one. Some phosphate buffers. One of the biggest ones, though, protein buffers. You might have talked a bit about protein buffers last semester. Hemoglobin is one of your main protein buffers. These hydrogen ions that are produced inside the red blood cells, they will bind to hemoglobin. There's a binding site for hydrogen ions. Once those hydrogen ions are bound to hemoglobin, they don't have an impact on pH. pH is hydrogen ions in solution. If that binds to a hemoglobin, it's not in solution. So most of the hydrogen ions produced actually bind to hemoglobin, and so it doesn't affect your pH. Hemoglobin is an important blood buffer. That's how we transport carbon dioxide. This is what happens in the tissues. Once you get to the lungs, it's all reversed. The CO2 in physical solution diffuses out. The stuff bound to hemoglobin will break off, diffuse out. The bicarbonate diffuses back into the red blood cells, recombines with water or hydrogen ions to make carbonic acid, which will break down into water and CO2, again, because of carbonic anhydrase. Remember, enzymes don't control the direction, just the rate. And then the CO2 is free to diffuse out of the red blood cell, out of the lungs. Let me put a quick, go through the small screen for a minute, and we'll wrap this up. All right, here we are. This slide again. Here's your tissues. This represents tissues. This is the blood. This is a red blood cell. Now this time, look at the blue arrows. They represent the direction of movement for carbon dioxide from the tissues into the blood. That's the direction the partial pressure or concentration gradient will move it. Thickness of the arrow represents relative amount. So here's your 7% just diffusing in. It's dissolved CO2 in the plasma. 23%, most of that diffuses into the red blood cells, and becomes carbaminohemoglobin. Here's a name for it down here if you need it.
Carbaminohemoglobin, that's 23%. This little bit is some of it binds to plasma proteins. Then the bulk of it, here's 70% of the CO2 goes into the red blood cell, combines with water in the presence of carbonic anhydrase. CAH is the abbreviation for carbonic anhydrase. There's your carbonic acid, which breaks into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. The hydrogen ions will bind to hemoglobin so they don't leave, they don't affect the pH. And the bicarbonate is released in exchange for chloride. There's your chloride shift to keep the charge neutrality. That's how it'll move into the blood from the tissues. In the lungs, it's just all reversed. The dissolved CO2 diffuses out. That allows the CO2 to break off the hemoglobin, diffuse out. The bicarb diffuses back into the red blood cells, combines with hydrogen ions that are released from the hemoglobin and is converted back into CO2 and water. The CO2 then diffuses out and you exhale it. And that's it. So this is the end of respiratory system. I'll be putting an exam up shortly.